Hey everyone, it's Deke. It's been a few weeks since I put out a video, but I really wanted to take my time and enjoy the leveling experience in Diablo IV. This is the first and only time the game's going to launch, and I really just wanted to soak it in and enjoy it. Today, we're going to be talking about the Barbarian, and mainly we're going to talk about stat priorities and how to facilitate pretty much any build you want to do with the Barbarian as you're leveling and for kind of more in-game style content. Okay, first, let's just take a look at the stats on the character sheet. These are going to be different for every single class. So, attack power is an evaluation of the damage that you deal based on your offensive stats scaled with your currently wielded weapon. For armor, the total armor granted by all of your equipped items. Okay, this is reducing the physical damage taken from enemies at your level. This decreases when you fight enemies higher. Keep in mind that armor also reduces a portion of non-physical damage as well. Then you have maximum life, which is pretty self-explanatory. We have strength, so if you look here, it increases your skill damage, so the skills you're using, and it increases your armor. So this is an incredible statistic for barbs. Intelligence, the only thing it does for Barbarian is it increases your resistance to all elements, and you're getting a lot of that naturally. Willpower is the resource generation. It improves your healing received and overpower damage. And then you have dexterity, which is your crit strike chance and dodge chance. So I would say, looking at these stats for Barbarian, strength and dexterity are going to be your main stats because they both provide direct damage output and direct defense. Okay, so let's look at some of these finite stats in a general sense. Basically, for the Barbarian, you are going to want critical strike chance, critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, and then more than likely something like core skill damage or damage versus close, because Barbarians are generally very close to their target at all times. Even with something like Rend, where you're doing bleed damage and bleeds can't crit, you're going to be taking a key passive that allows your Rend damage to be amplified based on your crit strike chance and your crit strike damage. So those skills are going to be very, very important. There's only a few places you can actually get these stats in the game, so mostly where we're looking for this stuff is on our weapons. So we have two two-handed weapons, and we have two one-handed weapons. Then we can also get some offensive stats on our gloves and on our rings. Now, you can get some on your necklace as well on the amulet, but you want to reserve the amulet usually for skill ranks and things like fury generation, because that's a slot that can roll some specific niche things that you can't get in other slots. Your two rings and your gloves are the only items that can actually roll crit strike chance, so you really want to look for these stats on those three items. When you're thinking about what types of damage stats that you want to use in the game, you want to think about how conditional are they. So these are all conditionals: damage while healthy, damage while fortified. All these things are conditional stats, meaning a condition must be met for them to trigger. So what you want to look for is, if you don't get your main stats, if you're not getting vulnerable, you're not getting crit damage, then you want to take the thing that is the least amount of conditions applied to it, right? So damage with physical, oh, that's great because you're always doing physical damage as a Barbarian. Even your bleeds count as physical damage. So these aren't quite as powerful as the other stats we talked about, but when you're looking at item drops, you can make a quick determination based on how conditional the thing is, right? If it's just with bleeding, that means that you're not getting any value out of that with any of your direct damage. So that might not be as strong as damage while healthy, for instance, if you're a very fortified character, which we're going to talk about in a minute. If you're always shielded and you're always fortified, then your damage output is going to be increased all the time if you're fortified all the time. Okay, speaking of fortified, let's look at some of the defensive stats in the game. There's obviously armor contribution. So armor is probably the biggest factor in you taking less damage in the game. So this is very easy to stack. Armor goes up on your gear based on its item level. So you will gain more armor the higher the item level you have. There's also flat damage reduction that can roll on a couple of slots. Specifically, the chest piece can roll damage reduction. As we talk about this idea of conditional things in the game, that's really how Diablo IV is positioned. It's all about conditional things. Well, damage reduction is not a condition. You're always receiving damage reduction. So again, when you're looking at stats, armor is pretty much going to trump everything else. It's going to trump resistances. It's going to trump any conditional types of damage. And then if you can get flat damage reduction, that's going to apply to everything in the game. So that's very strong as well. Then again, we start to look at things like damage reduction from close, damage reduction while fortified, damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. So a lot of the barbarian kits, a lot of the builds are going to be focusing around keeping your targets vulnerable, meaning that you're increasing your damage against them by 20%, and you can also buff this damage. And then again, if you have something that is damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, then that's going to be protecting you from those enemies that are most of the time going to be vulnerable. So we're looking for the window of condition to be as broad as possible when we're looking for these types of stats. But generally, you're going to be building armor, and we're going to be taking a few key aspects on specific item pieces that are going to make us super tanky. Okay, I think that's going to wrap up this video. We'll talk more in depth about Paragon boards and specific aspects in the next video. I hope this video has been informative and it helps some of you guys out there with your barbarians. I hope everyone's having fun with Diablo 4, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.